Very special thanks, of course, to Affordable Prestige Cars for providing the BMW 7 Series in this particular review, and even though, for those who are familiar with beards in cars, this isn't what you'd usually expect to see from them, more so a Jag or a Bentley, this one certainly ticks both of the boxes in their name. It's affordable and it's definitely prestigious, so if, of course, you are in the market for something like this, and perhaps even if you're quick enough, this exact car, then of course you can click the link in the video description and check out their current stock. One of my favourite things about doing the Beards in Cars series over the past few years has been watching my own opinion of certain brands evolve because of hands-on experience with their models. And with BMW, it's been a fascinating one for me because it's never the Beamers that you would expect to make the biggest impression, which do. Because even though something like the M2, M3 or M4, which I've reviewed in this same series, were certainly very quick and very impressive, immensely capable cars, and yet I don't remember much about actually driving them. What I do remember though is a 635d, a 640d, and now a 730d. These cars are so profoundly impressive, not just because they're quote-unquote quick or not, it's because of the value, because of how much car you get for the money, and because of how much more usability these cars have. It's all well and good to sound good and be fast or fun or charismatic, but to have a car with these kind of advantages, and certainly what was when new way more expensive than this exact car is $6,000, which is insane value for money, and you can see the mileage here on screen. It's got up around 110,000, which for many luxury cars should put you off. Back when I bought my first Quattroporte, for example, of course that is a very different animal to a diesel Beamer, but still that was about the same on mileage and was a horrific decision because of it. This in comparison, well, that's the great thing about a diesel engine, and especially a big torquey one such as this, a 3-litre straight 6 diesel with 400 foot-pounds of torque and 250 horses. It means it's never working that hard, and even with motorway miles such as this one has, well honestly, if you didn't look at the mileage, you would never guess that it had that many. It doesn't feel like it doesn't perform like it doesn't act like it. This car is from 2011 and it could still turn heads today. It's still a fantastic looking machine, and of course being an F generation 7 series from a F01 through to about an F04, depending on the year and the spec you choose, it's probably, at least for my taste, the last good looking 7 series. And of course that'll be controversial, but you know, once the grille started to get bigger and all those cliches, it just doesn't really do it for me. The one from the earlier 2000s, I never quite loved it as much as I wanted to. In terms of design, the E38, the one from around the mid-90s, which was a Bond car for a little while, that just timeless slab design, I've always loved the look of those, but it's just undeniable if you compare the advances in tech and efficiency of a car like this to a car like that. They're both gorgeous and both fantastic in their own way, but very, very different animals in terms of living with them. And to speak to the point of living with it, well, can you? It's all well and good buying a car that was a whole lot more, 10 times more in fact in some cases, but surely that means it's going to be horrific to live with something like this. Well, in some cases, yes, it could be horrific. One of the huge advantages I would say though when considering a car like this, and it doesn't just have to be a 7 Series, really is, as crazy simple as this sounds, if it's a diesel or not. And even though that is a very broad sweeping statement, being a diesel immediately gives you such a huge advantage over an equivalent petrol luxury car, because diesels can just take so many more miles and so much more use and kind of just shrug it off. And it's not like they don't require maintenance, of course they do, and they can have their own problems, and in some cases do. It's just that your likelihood of having a good long experience, certainly for that equivalent price point, is way more likely with a diesel car, particularly I would argue with a car exactly like this, because think about it, a car like this isn't purchased by somebody who's going to rag it, because somebody who's going to rag a diesel BMW ain't going to buy a 7 Series. They're going to buy something like an Alpina D3, which I reviewed, a performance diesel, a 3 Series in general, maybe a 335d, or maybe a 1 Series diesel, perhaps a 5 Series, and maybe if you want a GT, something like a 640d or a 635. But once you get up into that kind of territory, I would argue that the performance pivots. It's bought less so by boy racers and more by people who want a continent crusher, a car which will just waft along the motorway at 60-70 mile an hour, barely breaking a sweat, barely turning 1000 RPM, and getting insane fuel economy. That is not a car which is going to have lived a hard life. As long as it has service history behind it and that it's clearly been taken care of, which 9 times out of 10 you can tell that pretty quick from bodywork, wheels, interior. If a car's been abused, it doesn't take too long typically to see that, and if it hasn't been, you've got a pretty good chance that even if it's a high miler, it's probably motorway miles, which is what these cars were built for. The Autobahn, sitting there, like I said, barely turning 1,000 RPM, sipping on fuel like it's nothing, and getting around 50 to the gallon, which is bonkers fuel economy for a car like this. Again, one of the biggest advancements if you compare it to something like a 97 series. Does it have rivals, and are they worth considering? Well, absolutely. I'm yet to drive an S-Class. Of course, down the line it'd be worth checking my other reviews to see if I do, but that is probably this car's main rival, which I would like to review as well. The A8 doesn't quite do it for me. It's a bit normal looking, just kind of like a big A4, which I guess you could argue about Beemers as well, but the 7 Series has always set itself apart more to me. And one of the things which impresses me the most about this car, in terms of how it drives, how it handles, how it brakes even, is that even though it's not a performance car, it's not even like a crazy high model in the range, and yet it feels fantastic for the spec. It's effortless, it wafts along, and it's the kind of car where you put your foot down just a little bit for a few seconds and you're doing 50-60 miles an hour before you realise it. That's the kind of performance I would argue most people who buy a car like this would actually want. You don't want face-ripping, roaring performance, and nor would you expect it. It's got more than enough performance for what you'd actually need, which is getting away off the line, overtaking traffic, but still not really revving that high, and again, never breaking a sweat. Either you or the car. In terms of ride quality, which I would include in that, the comfort level, the handling, the steering, well, again, it's not a performance car, so you're probably not going to be throwing it through corners, but the handling is very nice to work with. It's pretty much what you'd expect. It's fairly neutral, doesn't feel heavy, doesn't feel overly big. The width even doesn't feel crazy on a UK road, and the ride is superb on this car. It is such a comfortable ride, and of course that is one of the main things you're going to expect and hope for in a car like this. The good thing is, it delivers. There are some luxury cars which can feel a little bit harder than you might expect or want, but this definitely isn't one of them. In fact, given that BMW technically owns Rolls-Royce these days, it kind of does feel like owning a Rolls-Royce but with better economy for a $6,000 budget. And even though it may not have the double R grille, well, it kind of feels like 9/10 of what you'd want from a car like that anyway, but with better running costs than something like a Rolls, and way, way better economy consistently. All the time, even if you put your foot down, you're still going to be getting over 30 to the gallon, and that's fantastic to live with. The boot, as you can tell, is huge as well. The rear seats are fantastic. It almost has a long wheelbase look to it, regardless of the spec you choose. Big rear doors, big rear seats, plenty of legroom. Even with someone like me in the front, putting the chair back and down, you've still got plenty of room in the back. The interior design, although very German, very understated, very office-esque, is still better, I would say, than the earlier 2000s, and a very nice place to be. I love the instrument layout. It does have some cues back to the 90s era, with the big round dials, no fancy digital rubbish in your face. I like it. It feels like right on the cusp between classic and modern. It also doesn't have any huge ridiculous touchscreens and all of that nonsense. It's just a nice place to be. As with any car, of course a 7 Series I would presume can have its issues, and of course that's where you would come in if you've been an owner in the past, or perhaps if you are currently one and you like to watch other reviews. Absolutely put your stories down below. If there's something which you believe potential owners should look for, maybe a personal story of yours or an anecdote, those are all very, very welcome and always are in Beards and Cars. Even so, I would say that if you do get the chance to try one of these out, if you're already considering something like maybe a diesel S-Class, diesel 7 Series, diesel A8, maybe diesel XJ, it's in very good company at the very least. And I would say that even though the Beemer is a bit more clean-cut and understated in its styling inside and out, it is a wonderful car to drive. There's no more important point in this entire video that I could keep coming back to than just the price. And it's not just this one. These kind of prices are incredible for the amount of car you're getting. I would recommend getting a diesel for a variety of reasons. Of course, the car is designed to be quiet inside anyway, so the fact that you have a diesel instead of a roaring petrol engine really doesn't matter. You have so much more torque, so much more accessible low-end performance, infinitely better fuel economy in most cases, and again, if you are getting the lowest possible price, or if you're looking specifically for that end of the market, then of course the mileage is by definition always going to be higher in that kind of price range, and if you are willing to go over six-figure mileage, like 100,000 plus, well then definitely get a diesel. You have a much, much better chance of having a great car and keeping it for a good long while. Plus, of course, because it's efficient, even the road tax isn't actually that bad, all things considered. Overall though, that's it for my thoughts on this particular generation of the 7 Series, and even more specifically, of course, the 730d. If you haven't checked out my reviews for other BMW diesels like the 635 and the 640, and plenty of other Beemers as well, including actually earlier this year the classic E33 series, then there's certainly more Beemer content for you to check out. And like I said, I'd love to hear owners' thoughts down below in the comments. But I'll see you next time with more, and for now, thanks for watching.